Well, it's another beautiful day in Tofino, British Columbia on Chesterman Beach. A little overcast today, but I decided I'm going to record on the beach. May have to put my hat on in a few minutes, but today we're going to talk about that moment when your phone rings or a notification lights up on your phone and you already know what's coming. You look at the name and you think, oh boy, what happened now? When you should be thinking, oh good, it's her, can't wait to catch up. Wonder what's happening. Just a tiny drop in your stomach instead that tells you that friend who needs you always is calling, because she only calls when something is wrong. She only calls when she needs something. She only calls when she's in a crisis. And somehow you always seem to be the one that she chooses to call with the bad news, never with the good news. And why do you answer? Well, because you're a good friend, because you care, because that's who you are, that's who you've always been. And, maybe there's a little hope in the back of your mind that this time it'll be different. This time will be good news or just a pleasant check-in. Maybe she's just calling to see how you are. How's your day? But sadly, it isn't. That isn't what happens. And lately you find that you are a little tired, not exactly of her, but of the role you find yourself always playing. You're the strong one. You're the dependable one. You're the fixer. So today, let's talk about those friendships where you feel more like the emergency contact and not a true friend. Well, I've been thinking a lot about this topic since our last video because there's definitely a pattern. How do we end up being that person? Well, the dynamic is subtle at first. You'll get a friend who calls you or a new friend and says, can I just vent for a minute? Or, I don't know who else to talk to. Maybe comments like, you're the only one who understands. You just seem to give the best advice. It can almost feel like love bombing in the beginning, building you up, feeding you, making you feel good about yourself. But unfortunately, it's for a reason. And yes, at first it feels really flattering, right? You feel trusted, you feel needed, you feel liked, you feel valued. And who doesn't like that feeling? And especially if you're the oldest child like me, maybe you've grown up being the fixer, the dependable one. I always feel like I've been the grown-up in any room, whether it's with my family, whether it's in friendship, whether it was in my corporate career, in my political career. So when someone starts to lean in on me, at first it feels really natural. It really feels normal. And honestly, there's a part of me that likes it. I like it when people value my advice. But is that really what's happening? And so I think this is a point where I want to stop and I want to say that we're not talking about a friend who's suffering. Sometimes our friends just have bad things happen. Maybe they're going through a traumatic time, a divorce, a marriage betrayal, a huge life change. Maybe it's an illness, an injury. We want to be friends. We don't want to ghost someone we care about when they hit a rough patch. So this is not about that. This is about giving ourselves grace to be a good friend when a good friend is needed, but not to feel taken advantage of by someone who only seeks us out when they have a problem, someone who has a repeating pattern. And it becomes the definition of your relationship. You play a role, period, end of story. But over time, you will start to notice that, you really don't have normal conversations with this particular friend or acquaintance. You find that you don't share much about your own life. Well, maybe you can't get a word in edgewise, and you don't call her just to chat because that's not the dynamic. Honestly, the dynamic is about her. And for many of us, I don't know about you, but I just don't go running to friends for help. I tend to try to work it out myself. And I'm okay with that. But it contributes to what you do in the friendship. And maybe you don't notice how much they're leaning in on you because you're not feeling the need to lean in on them. And that contributes to the problem because you're also coming across as someone who's always available to listen, never has their own issues, right? Or maybe they assume in a weird way that you like being the center of their drama or being in the know, maybe not the center of their drama. They know you won't interrupt with your own issues, or worse, expect an open ear in repayment. You're training them how to treat you. And the relationship can be about the latest crisis and not anything more. They don't have time for you when things are good. And so that's not a friendship. That's just emotional outsourcing, right? It's like a cheap pick up the phone and hire a therapist, but you don't have to pay, and we're not qualified to be a therapist. So how do some of us end up in this role? Well, I think somewhat generational. I think for many of us that are in 50s, 60s, 70s, we were brought up to be strong, to be capable, to not burden others, to be someone other people can count on. Especially, like I said, if you were the oldest or an only child, or depending on the dynamics of your family, you may have been in a situation where you had to be the adult in the room, and as a result, we became very self-sufficient. But unfortunately, strong women attract people who want to lean in. And these friends are not always malicious. They're not even doing it consciously sometimes. Ironically, it's our strength that is the pull. Our strength can become a negative, a burden that we're placing on ourselves, and we don't even realize that we're doing it because we just think that way. But if you rarely need anything super emotional from friends, if you're the one who's good in a storm, good in an emergency, well, guess what? You become the storm shelter. You're everyone's safe place. And so somewhere along the way, the friendship becomes uneven, even if it's a bit of our own responsibility. And again, I'm not talking about one or two traumatic things that are happening. I'm talking about an ongoing where someone's using you to process their emotions, but you prefer to process yours alone. She unloads, you absorb. She spirals, you stabilize. And because you're good at it, because you're strong, because you're resilient, no one notices the toll that it's taking on you. Sometimes even you. Some people assume you're always available to listen to their problems. And again, sometimes they think you enjoy it. But there's a cost, and we notice it more as we get older. And we talk about this all the time on the channel. You've only got so much bandwidth, and you find yourself feeling drained, even a little resentful. And then you feel guilty for feeling resentful. So then you're avoidant, right? You see your name pop up, and you're like, I didn't see that. I've got to run to the grocery store. And then you start to judge yourself. What's wrong with me? She's just going through a hard time again. But here's the key question that we have to ask ourselves. Is she always going through a hard time? Have we trained her to the point where she thinks our friendship is all about that trauma bonding? Some people live in permanent crisis, and it's not because life is harder for them. Sometimes it's just they never learn to regulate themselves. You have to ask yourself that question and answer that for yourself with that particular friendship. But if you find yourself always the regulator, You never get to just be in the friendship and enjoying the other person. Well, at this stage of life, I just don't think we have the same energy for that. Drama used to energize some of us when we were younger, spilling the tea, and now it drains us. And I laugh at how much I used to be able to handle in just the course of my ordinary life with my kids and my job and the activities and trying to climb the corporate ladder and politics and deadlines and putting out fires, the cooking, the washing, the house cleaning, the dogs. We just handled it. But now I really notice it in my elderly parents. And now that I'm not on that ladder anymore, I'm not climbing to get anywhere, I just don't have the bandwidth for it. And it's a really, really hard realization and a little bit uncomfortable, because sometimes, and I've done it, we participate in the dynamic when we never ask for support, when we don't share vulnerability, when we don't let people see us messy. Well, honestly, they don't even know how to show up for us because they've never had to. We've never put them on the spot. We've never needed. And honestly, they may come to you because they put you on a pedestal. They may think you are a rock star. You're one of their friends, one of their family members who has it all together, because we've created our own mousetrap. We're adored, but in a way we don't want to be adored. Ideally, real friendship includes mutual curiosity, shared laughter, checking in with each other, emotional give and take. But when you find you're in a relationship where the other person never asks you any questions, they always redirect conversation back to themselves, if they disappear when you need something, that's not a friend going through a crisis and that you need to be there for. That's a friend, sort of a friend, who's developed a pattern. So what do you do when you say, oh my gosh, that's what's going on? Well, we talk about it all the time. We don't want to dramatically end friendships, especially not at our age. But we do get to adjust the role that we play and the role they play. Stop being immediately available. We say it all the time. Don't be afraid to let the call go to voicemail. Call when you have the energy. Shorten the call. We talked in our last video about the 15-minute rule. I've got a hard stop. I wanted to check in on you. I've got 15 minutes. And stop overfunctioning. Oh my gosh, when she says, what should I do? Why don't you ask her, well, what do you want to do? But we love to take control. Share something real about yourself with this friend and watch how she handles it. What happens? Does she lean in, or does she quickly pivot back to herself? I guarantee you there's a pattern, and you'll see it quickly. It'll tell you everything you need to know. A lot of women in our community have spoken about the profound hurt they go through when they injure themselves. They get sick, their spouse gets sick, and the women they thought were their friends, the women they've been there for, just seem to disappear. And they don't wonder how, they wonder, how could that have happened? I was there for her, but now when I need help, she's not there for me. I wonder if you went back in time and looked at those friendships or those friendly acquaintances. What was the friendship? What was the relationship built on? Were you always the one who was doing for them? Were you always the planner? Were you the one who always called? Honestly, I think when you look back, you find that the people that disappeared were never really involved in the friendship the same way that you were, or maybe they're just not the same kind of person you are. Maybe you're more empathetic. Maybe you're more compassionate. We're all different. Maybe you're a fixer, and that's just the gear you go into when there's a problem. But this friend or these friends may not be made of the same stuff you're made of. Now, boundaries are not punishments. They're just role corrections. And if a friend pushes back when you try to mix things up a little, well, then you honestly have your answer. It's not always the answer you want, but at least you know, and you can reformat the friendship so that it works for you, so that you're not putting in too much time in a relationship where it will not be paid back or given back. You get to be supported just like you support. You may not need help in little daily crises, but if something big happens in your life, you deserve friends who will step up. And unfortunately, sometimes those friends ghost you because they don't know how to handle it. They see you as an emergency contact, not the other way around. The women who are meant for this next season of our lives will not need us to carry them. They will walk beside you. And that feels very different. No one wants to be constantly leaning in on a friendship, but we want to know that if we have to lean, someone will be there to catch us. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got a lot out of it. I'd love to hear in the comments, have you always been the helper? Have you always wanted to be the one people leaned on? Have you contributed to that dynamic in some of your family relationships or even some of your friendships? It's been a great week here on the beach, but I look forward to getting back into my own kitchen, and I look forward to all of your comments as I make my way home. Some of us are the helpers, some of us are the ones who are always there. And next week, we're going to take it a little step further and talk about something that connects directly to this. What happens when you're always the strong friend and suddenly you're not okay? Well, let's talk about that and figure out a way that we can set ourselves up for success with our friends. Relationships, connections are truly important at this time of life. And I don't take anything away from a friend who is going through a rough time. But we want to be able to talk about family members, friends, who get us into these patterns with them that we just don't seem to be able to get out of. Look forward to seeing you next week. I'm going to share a little bit of the beach. And again, see you next week back in Texas in my kitchen. Take care. Have a great week. Bye-bye.